So our first speaker of the morning is going to be Cody Desautel. Cody has served as the Natural Resource Director for the Confederated Tribes of Colville Reservation since April 2014. Prior to that, he worked for the tribe as forest engineer, forester, and fuels planner, and for the BIA as a natural resource officer, soil conservationist, and inventory forester. Cody has a bachelor's degree in environmental science from Haskell.
Morning, everyone. So we will jump right into this, recognizing that we've got a limited amount of time for the speakers, so I will try to stay on track. So I've got 6 things to visit with you about this morning. So first, the ITC report. There's been a lot of work done on this over the last really few years as far as planning, setting up the team, making site visits, and a fairly good description last night based on what we know so far. That report is supposed to be due late November, maybe early December, based on what Vinny told us last night. So my target date may be a little off. And that will still be presented to Congress in the spring of 2023. We'll firm up dates once we get closer, but it's usually late spring, early summer. And the important thing I wanted to focus on with this, I think most have sent in the information that helps inform particularly workforce. But if you have not, please make sure we get that to the team, because that's extremely critical to demonstrate why there's so much need in Indian country. And then once that report is done, we always develop an implementation and communication plan. So with all those findings, we try to take those to Congress or the appropriate agencies to make sure changes are made that help Indian country accomplish their goals and objectives, whether that be on your own reservations or on adjacent state and federal land. But our ability to accomplish any of the implementation goals is largely dependent on the capacity that ITC has, which we have a board of 11. All of us have full-time jobs, so the ITC work we do is just an addition. So if we can get more help, if folks have some particular things, especially after reading the report they want to assist with, please reach out to us. We'd love to have the assistance. I think it was earlier this spring, the Forest Service rolled out the Wildland Fire Crisis Strategy. And it was a 10-year plan intended to help reduce the risk across the West. Everybody is familiar with the trends of forest fires really over the past couple decades, but particularly the last 5 or 6 years. The goal of the plan is to treat an additional 20 million acres on federal land, and I don't know what the number is for how many they're treating now, but I would suspect that's a considerable increase. And in addition to the 20 million additional acres on national forest land, they'd like to see an additional 30 million acres treated across state, private, tribal, other federal agencies, and state. So we don't quite know what that funding is going to look like yet. We do know that they rolled out the first 10 priority fire sheds, and Matt will have a map that shows where those exist across the country. They're primarily in the West or exclusively in the West, but I don't think that precludes you from applying for funding or working on other projects in high priority fire sheds. And again, this is a 10-year plan. I would expect 10 years as the start of the implementation date, and probably like the year 10 projects will have another 3 or 4 years of actual field operations to complete the work. We've also been working with the Forest Service on the Wildland Risk Reduction Infrastructure Team. So you've heard a lot this week about all the additional funding we're going to get from the infrastructure bill. So we, after that was passed, entered into a challenge cost share agreement with the Forest Service to give some feedback on how that could best be implemented in Indian country. We're a little different, especially as a DOI bureau compared to the Forest Service. So we think we have a pretty good path forward on how we utilize this funding, how it gets awarded, and are trying to encourage the agencies to use existing funding mechanisms so we don't put undue burdens on not just the forestry and natural resource staff at the tribes, but also their administrative staff. So the agreement is to cooperate and design and facilitate tribal roundtable discussions. We did have a couple of those, and I think we plan to have more, and we have office hours scheduled in the coming weeks, correct, Laura? So if you have questions, you can reach out to ITC or attend one of those listening sessions. Hopefully we can answer your questions. It's really intended to be dialogue with people that have specific questions about projects. It's not necessarily presentations. Those already happened and I think are available on the ITC website. So, oh, I guess I had it at the bottom. So the first roundtable was the 26th, and I think we had them on the 27th. So more listening sessions to come. So in the 2018 Farm Bill, Tribal Forest Protection Act Authority, or 638 Contract Authority, was expanded to TFPA projects. It took us a fair bit of time to get this worked out. The Forest Service didn't quite know how that would work within USDA, so we've worked with them over the last couple of years to develop templates and processes to ensure when tribes submit applications for projects, we know how to get approval through the Forest Service, what forms we need, and then ultimately where the funding will come from. And as Matt will tell you here shortly, there's $160 million that was included in the infrastructure bill for both Good Neighbor and TFPA. But since TFPA was included in that $160 million, there should be a lot of opportunity for tribes. I would assume that money gets spent or allocated disproportionately to tribes. So if there's work you want to do on your adjacent federal land, whether that be Forest Service or BLM, strongly encourage you to look at those authorities, to visit ITC's website and look at the forms we have. They're fairly straightforward. And if you have questions, we do have people to support you on that. So with the many new authorities we got in the 2018 Farm Bill, we're now looking forward to the 2023 Farm Bill to see what additional authorities or fixes from the last Farm Bill that ITC will push and lobby for. So we know that we have a couple fixes we need, primarily the Good Neighbor Authority. I think Matt mentioned it yesterday, and it's important to note that that authority, I think, is a great mechanism for tribes going forward because it allows you, or will allow you, once we get the fix, either through the Farm Bill or a couple of the standalone pieces of legislation that have been proposed, to retain program income to help pay for staffing and infrastructure that you need to work on the next project. So again, I think Matt is probably right. That probably won't be fixed till the 2023 Farm Bill. And we'll hope that they pass that earlier in 23 versus, I think it was December 8th or something, they passed the 2018 Farm Bill. So keep an eye out for that. Also looking at other issues we had, I know at least one tribe brought up a problem they had accessing NRCS funding based on how they describe tribal land. They included him as a large industrial private landowner, which hasn't been the case historically, but with that classification comes some restrictions from available funding sources. So we'll try to make sure we get that resolved as well. And then looking at other authorities, where do we have work to be done? What does USDA have that tribes can utilize? And where do we need expansion of that? So if you've got thoughts about that, please reach out, whether that's through email, phone call, something to let us know where you think there's shortfalls in USDA processes and how we could potentially address that in the Farm Bill. So, and I'll just be brief on this one because Matt will go into much more detail. The infrastructure bill, 1.2 trillion, signed into law on November 5th. And again, a great opportunity, probably a once in a lifetime. Again, I know in my career anyways, the only time I've ever said money's not a limiting factor. But with that comes a lot of responsibility, a lot of need to build infrastructure and capacity to be able to take advantage of that. We do have a number of different tribal specific allocations for TFPA, for ecosystem restoration, for wildland fire risk reduction, but recognizing these are all additional. So we know we have regular duties to accomplish at home with our existing funding sources. How do we staff up to take advantage and do additional work, whether that's at home or on your adjacent state and federal lands? So in the working groups that I've been involved with, there's been a strong focus on building capacity, and that's been across the board, whether it's in HR or contracting or any other non-natural resource management functional areas, to make sure that we have the ability to hire people quickly, to have contracting officers sitting in the office that can review and approve these things to make sure we get the funding in a timely manner. And then ultimately, do we have people on the ground that can get this work done? And I encourage you to not only look at your staffing internally, but what is your contracting capacity outside of that? Because really, I think that's the only way to increase your workload in the very short term. And do we have enough people out there that can do this work on the ground? So I know that Cowbell has experienced that specifically with burned area rehab. We were allocated a lot of money for a few bad fire years we had, but found out that we only had a certain number of contractors to accomplish a certain amount of acres. So I would encourage you to assess what your current infrastructure is and see where we have shortfalls and try to address that in the near term. We've also got the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. That was touched on briefly yesterday. So this is an advisory committee that's led by both the Department of Ag and Interior and includes FEMA. So we know we've had, again, significant fire years over the last couple decades and haven't necessarily done a great job managing them either from the suppression perspective or the rehab perspective. So this administration saw a need to take a harder look at that and to develop a commission, a very diverse commission, 18 total members, but across all spectrums of resource management, whether that be state, federal, tribal, NGO, and talk about what's being helped or what's useful, what's going well, and what's not. So the commission is tasked with forming recommendations and strategies to help prevent fires, to help manage wildfires, to help suppress, and then ultimately to recover. So I think particularly dependent on the geographic area you're located in, most all tribes have a lot of experience with this or a fair bit of experience and probably have some very good recommendations. The unknown at this point is who will be on this commission. So with 18 total committee members, I think when I talked last week when they called, they said they had over 500 applicants. So we don't know who ultimately will end up on this commission, but I was told they're targeting 2 to 3 different tribal representatives. So if ITC ultimately ends up with one of those seats, we'll be sharing this information, whether those be newsletters or future ITC board meetings, and really looking for feedback from tribes to make sure we understand the complexities and unique nature of each of your geographic areas and how you fight fire and how you recover from fire. Oh, and I wanted to mention one more thing I didn't put in the slideshow because I didn't know how much time I would have, but I do have a few extra minutes. We've also been working with the Forest Service on the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program. It's $1 billion. Again, Matt mentioned that yesterday, and he will go into a little more detail about the funding. But it allows tribes to either be funded to develop community wildfire protection plans, or if you've got a community wildfire protection plan that is current, which they deem current as having been developed or approved within the last 10 years, it provides funding to accomplish the goals in that plan. So I'm not very familiar with many tribes that have community wildfire protection plans. So if you do, please reach out and give me some feedback. I did find out this week that Alaska has a number of them, so $1 billion is a lot of money to help implement those strategies and help make your communities resilient. But in the meantime, I think it at least gives tribes an opportunity to apply to get some planning done. And we expect our recommendations to be wrapped up by end of May, early June, and that funding to start to roll out, well, the applications to roll out in mid to late July. So keep an eye out for that, and I think that is it. And I think we're running through all the presentations, and then we will take questions at the end, because we've only got about 20 minutes for each of us, so we're trying to be brief. So thank you.